Hi and welcome to this latest episode in my recruitment series. This goes over various issues surrounding recruitment in the World of Warcraft, particularly in Legion. Some of them are vlog based, some of them are more informative. This is very much back onto the informative style of things, and it is what, in my opinion, are the attributes that Mythic Raiders need over people who perhaps are just more limited to heroic raiding. And I'm going to go over several things. First of all, some general attributes, and then specifically what I look for in tanks, in healers, and in DPS as someone who recruits. Yes, we are recruiting, by the way. Sometimes I get the odd little comment. We are recruiting, but at the moment we're after casters. If you're a warlock, good affliction warlock especially, or hit us up. Or a healer, in fact. But yeah, so in this one, what we're doing at the moment is when we're recruiting, obviously, it would be delightful if we could recruit people who were very experienced raiders. They've got the cutting edges from the past few years. That'd be brilliant. However, a lot of people get burnt out. We've particularly talked about the fact that people have been burnt out in Legion. So increasingly, when you look at who seems available for it, because we don't just, I've talked about in past videos, wait for people to apply to us. We get nowhere. So we actively go out and try and find people, and wherever they've made themselves known, whether it be WoW Progress, whether it be the official forums, whether it be MMO Champion forums or whatever, or whether it be we hear about guilds collapsing and we go in and try and just ask people, oh, are you looking for a guild now that your guild's not going anymore? That can be fruitful as well. We've had some really good players from that. But increasingly, you're likely to have to recruit. And I say have to recruit as if it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to have a few people like this, because you want to bring new people in. If we want raiding to push on and keep going strong, we need to be encouraging people who've never raided before to step up and do it at the highest level. But you ultimately recruiting people who perhaps have no or very limited Mythic experience. And how do you know that they're able to cope with these much harder Mythic bosses? And of course we can't. So what is it that we actually look for? Now, what ultimately we want, what the attributes that we want from Mythic Raiders, even if you've been used to heroic so far, is first of all mechanics over DPS. Absolute classic case last night. We've got quite a few new people this week who've now sort of seen our farm bosses, so hopefully much stronger next week. Although, as I say, if you're a warlock, hit us up. Or even a healing priest. But we were doing Star Augur last night, and the Grand Conjunction, just time after time. As I said, we did have a few new people, so, you're a bit patient with it. Although, the problem with that is, and we kept saying to people, there is no DPS check here. Maybe used to be, but it's been nerfed so heavily, and now that we've got our 7.2 traits, there isn't a DPS check to make in that fight, realistically, until right at the end of the fight. And yet we were wiping to Grand Conjunction like earlier in the fight. And we're trying to sort of explain to people what's happening. We know what's happening is you're trying to min-max to maximise your damage, and therefore not paying full attention to dealing with the mechanic at that time. The result is that you don't deal with the mechanic effectively and we wipe. And it's not necessarily pure DPS whoring. It could be people trying to rank. Well, you don't rank if the boss doesn't die for a start. But ultimately, it's because people focus too much on their DPS. And we need to say, no, don't. We're not actually worried about your DPS. We understand that your DPS won't be as high. If you're constantly getting spammed with, say, on that fight, icy ejections or fell ejections, or having Grand Conjunction and you're the one who moves to the other person, and things like that, we understand your DPS is going to suffer. We don't judge just based on exactly where you come on the damage meter. We look at logs, and this is what sometimes I think some people who've come from heroic raiding or lower progress Mythic raiding don't quite understand, is we do understand that. We look at logs, and we can see as well in the raid, we know whether you're doing the mechanics correctly or not. We're not at all impressed at coming top of DPS. We've had people who, I've not necessarily in the guild I'm in now, but I've certainly over the years we've had recruits into guilds that I've been in who've done really high on DPS and have not passed their trial because they will not get it into their heads that they have to deal with mechanics. They're not helping us kill the boss. So mechanics have to be crucial. And when you first join a guild, when I first join a guild, I am very focused on that. I don't even worry about my damage. I don't care what other people think about it, because I know that experienced players won't be looking at my damage until the second week anyway, because I've just joined the guild. They want to know that I'm not fucking them over by wiping us. So I will be totally focused on dealing with mechanics, especially if I've joined a guild that's killed a boss that I haven't. That has happened 2 or 3 times in my WoW career. And then you just totally, you ask, first of all, you ask questions before the raid even goes on, like, how do you deal with this? How do you deal with that? And then you just focus on that and you just make sure you do that right. And then, and the damage will come anyway. Because that's another thing we expect. We expect that people who are going to be capable of doing mythic bosses actually know how to play their class. Yes, we understand some people are better than others. That's fine. I understand that there's people a lot better than me. That's fine. But I can play it well enough. I understand the class. I understand it very well. And I can do it well enough. And that's the other key thing. It shouldn't actually take a lot of your focus to do a decent amount of damage on the targets you need to do it on. We're not talking about overall damage here, because that's sometimes yes, sometimes no. But on the targets that you need to be beasting down, whatever it is happens to be for you, at the same time as being able to put your full focus onto your mechanics. Because the rest of it should be like muscle memory type thing. You should just know how to do your damage. And the other key thing is learning fights quickly. Sometimes you get players and you look at their logs. Like if you just look at their logs, and what a lot of people do is just look at the logs and look at the percentiles, and it looks really good. But what you're looking at there is kills. Another thing I try and do, if I'm being discerning, is I actually try and find their wipes. I actually look for the first time they killed a boss, particularly if it's a tricky boss. And then I look at that night, because it's very likely they didn't kill it the first try that night. And if they did, I'll just go to the previous night. And I'll look through their wipes. How were they doing on those wipes? Because sometimes you get a situation where a guild kills a boss, the first time a particular boob doesn't get the mechanics that can wipe you. So it's almost like you're waiting for the idiot not to get those mechanics. We need to sort of check. Are you someone who, during those wipes, was actually doing their job properly? And actually, your guild would have killed it sooner if everyone were like you. That's ideally what we want. So being able to pick up the fight quickly is a really key thing. It's all right. There's some players, as I say, who will perform well on farm, but don't perform so well on progress. Well, it's the progress that matters the most. We want people to perform farm on well as well, because the quicker you do the farm, the more time, especially when you're only doing a few nights. As I say, it used to be the case. A lot of guilds would do 5 nights. Very, very rare now. 3 or 4 is much more common. In fact, increasingly the 3 that we do is becoming more common. So you've got limited time for progress, and so obviously reducing that farm time as much as possible is better as well. So what am I looking for mostly in logs? Let's say someone's only got heroic logs and they don't really have mythic logs. I pay very little attention, I'm going to be honest, to the actual mechanics side of it, because if I look at a particular fight and I say, well, they're not really doing the mechanics there, well, it's heroic. It might well be that they and their whole raid group are so far above those mechanics, they're just blasted through it. So we don't judge harshly people not doing mechanics there. So what I'm mostly looking for, especially in terms of healers and DPS, is just raw numbers. Sheer raw numbers. With the healers, of course, we don't just want it to be people who sniping numbers, sorry. But yeah, it is a bit more difficult there. So therein is where I would have much more of a discussion with them, particularly over voice comms. Would give them scenarios. Okay, what do you... Because we'd expect that someone who's, let's say they're doing heroic now, but they really want to get into mythic raiding. We would sort of expect, at the position we're at now, because we're on 8 out of 10 now, that they would understand, they would have already looked ahead at some of the mythic fights. And if they hadn't, we'd give them some scenarios with mechanics and say, how would you deal with that? What would you deal with that? And so on. So we'd have to really sort of talk to them to try and get an understanding of, we're not just going to straight out say, what's more important, mechanics or DPS? Because everyone's going to say mechanics. Everyone knows that mechanics are more important. But do they really feel it? Do they really understand that? So we try and have discussions to sort of really test that out. Now, in terms of the specific role, so what are we looking for? So with tanks, I'm not a tank myself, and I sometimes tear my head out when I have to look for a tank or a healer, and I keep asking people, what do I need to look for? What do I need to look for? People say, well, uptime on active mitigation, use of cooldowns, things like that. So I've got to go through. Again, this is where going through kills is no good. You want to go through the wipes. Did they wipe because the tank died? Okay, if the tank died, why did they die? Did they use a cooldown? Were they using a cooldown at the point at which they took that damage that killed them? You're looking for things like that. It's much more involved with a tank. But what you ideally want, and this is very difficult to check from logs, this is the real distinction with tanks at mythic level. At Mythic level, tanks are taking brutal amounts of DPS at various points during the fight. There are just things that are going to do massive amounts of damage on a lot of Mythic bosses, some heroic bosses as well. Now, tanks, of course, you've got your active mitigation, but then you've also got defensive cooldowns. And it's those cooldown use. Now, you might sort of think if you're just doing content that's way below your level, that they're emergency use, oh shit buttons. Well, they're not. They need to be used. They're part of your strategy as a tank. On most Mythic bosses, I say, and even some heroic bosses. Because sometimes there'll just be an ability you have to deal with, which will just kill you. It will just kill you. And that's what you use those defensives for. Now, sometimes you have enough defensive to deal with them. Quite often, especially on the more difficult Mythic fights, you will also need externals at certain times as well. So what we need tanks to do is when they're doing the progress, is they're getting used to these things. They'll know what hits they can take. They'll know what hits they need to use a cooldown for. They'll know what hits they need to call for an external for. So what will happen is a tank will die to something. What we need of a good Mythic tank is for them to identify exactly what killed them and exactly what needs to happen so that they don't die to it again. Now, sometimes they will just say, oh, I actually mucked up something there. That was my fault. Okay, sometimes they'll say, okay, that hit harder than I expected. I will need to use this cooldown now. Sometimes they will say, okay, that I can't take that. I don't have a defensive to use at that time. I am going to need an external, and they'll ask for an external, usually from a healer. So we can put that into place as well. And again, for the next few times, they're probably going to call it out until whoever's giving it to them gets used to that point of the fight. That's idea, that communication, that understanding of what has killed them and what to do to prevent it happening is what's needed. Now ask yourself this. Let's say you're in a guild that's, quite far behind on progress and ask yourself this. On some fights, do you get situations where the tanks die and they die at the same point of the fight time after time after time? We've all been there. That is ultimately caused by the fact that the tank is not correctly identifying what's going wrong and what needs to be done to stop it happening again. And until that happens, you will not reliably be able to kill any boss. You need to reliably kill a boss. The tanks need to sort all that out. I often say on a lot of fights, often DPS are waiting for the tanks to work out what to do in the fight, and then everyone else can progress on it. And the good tanks, as I say, will do that, go through that process very, very quickly. In terms of healers is all about proactivity, reactivity, and triage effectively. So proactivity is understanding when lots of damage is going to be caused to certain people. Now, it can be individuals, such as tanks that are going to take big hits, having an awareness. I mean, healers are like, it's the hardest role. I always say this, it's the hardest role. I've been a healer myself sometime in the past. I know it's a lot different now. But the principle is very much the same. You've got people who are going to take large amounts of damage at certain times, and you need to know about that. They're going to take unexpected amounts of damage. But again, it's sort of semi-predictable. You sort of know. First of all, when you've been in a raid group for a while, you know which people take too much damage. You sort of get a feeling for that. You can moan at them, but you know who it's going to be. And you know when it's going to be as well. So if you've got a good overall overview of the fight, I always found it much easier to raid lead as a healer, because the two things work together. As both raid leader and healer, you want to know what everyone is doing. And so the two things, for me, mesh together really well. So you can be proactive in making sure, first of all, if it's raid-wide damage, nothing anyone can do about it, that you're coordinating the raid-wide cooldowns. So tanks will need to coordinate individual cooldowns on themselves. Healers need to be able to coordinate raid-wide cooldowns to deal with large amounts of raid-wide damage that no one can do a lot about. Such as, again, if we go back to Star Augur, on the second add, on the second cast of its flashbang type effect, then there's crazy amounts of damage coming in. Healers need to know that people need to be topped off at that point, and we need defensives as well. When people go out for the icy ejection on that fight, again, I'm using that fight because we did it last night, so it's fresh in my mind. The horror. When you're taking out with icy ejection, again, when that goes off, you get a big burst of damage, and that's applied on heroic as well as Mythic. It's fearsome though. So again, you need to know that people who've got icy ejection are going to need to be full on health. Some people can do what you can do. You can heal yourselves up, like I can heal myself up. Some people can't, and they need healing. So again, it's and that's triage. So what you're doing here is you're in a situation where, let's say you've got two people who've just suddenly taken 50% of their health in damage. One of them has got icy ejection. One of them hasn't. So as a healer, you should straight away know, well, the one with ice ejection is just about to take a fearsome amount of damage. They're going to die if I don't heal them up. The other one hasn't. Well, at that point of the fight, there's nothing else that should damage them. If they die to something, that's their own fault because they're in the wrong place. So you prioritize the one who is most likely to die. And again, it sort of sometimes doesn't necessarily matter who it is. It's like, can I heal the person up before they take an amount of damage that would otherwise kill them, in which case you put them lower down. And, and someone who's like, tanks are usually higher priority as well, but not always. As I say, if a tank's lost 10% health, but then the tank swaps just happen and that tank is no longer actively tanking, they might have a dot from like Croesus or something, they might still take a bit of damage, but it's not a fearsome amount. But someone else has lost a load of health and there's something going to come in that's going to do further damage to them, well, again, you prioritise those. And again, having a good understanding of that is a real skill of a healer. And then there's reactivity. Reactivity is very much about the stuff that you don't expect. Someone who's just done a thing that you didn't expect. They didn't mean to do it. Some unnecessary damage that perhaps that I said before about some people are just naturally doing that. Well, some people don't. Some people are generally quite reliable, but then a thing happens or lots of things are happening at once and it distracts them and it's like a forced error as opposed to an unforced error and they take a load of damage, being able to react to that. And again, that quick triage calculation and reevaluation and being able to heal them up as necessary is, again, a really good mark of a healer. Then when it comes to DPS, so with DPS, the key thing is, of course, making sure that there's two things really. One is that they DPS the right targets at the right time. And two is that they are dealing with the mechanics that they should be dealing with. So what sort of things am I looking for here? Trilliax is always a really good one because a lot of the players we look at, even if they're much further behind in progress, have probably killed Trilliax. Not everyone, but a lot of people probably have. So at that point, what we're looking for, a couple of things. First of all, the stuffed debuff. Are they getting the cake? That's an important mechanic for all DPS to do. You can even look at a replay on Warcraft logs. So if you're looking at some stuff and you see a particular DPS doesn't seem to have a cake log, well, maybe other people just get into it a lot quicker. Maybe that raid group is really good at getting the cake. And so some people don't get so much. Okay, fair enough. So, but then what you'll do is you'll look to see if when they're not getting cake, is there cake up that they should be able to get? And if there is, well, it doesn't look like they're trying very hard to get it. Another thing is that there's an ad that appears on Mythic mode. A couple, it depends on how long the fight takes you. Are they focusing that ad down? They should switch to a position whereby instead of focusing on the boss, they're focusing on the ad, maybe cleaving onto the boss, but effectively targeting that ad when that ad is up. Is that happening? So you're looking for things like that. On Croesus, when people moved out of the burning pitch, are they? Or are they still trying to DPS the boss? When, depending on how the soaking goes, if their ad's up, are they going past the ads without doing any DPS or even stunning it or anything like that? Or are they going to the ad, interrupting it, stunning it, all the rest of it? Again, not easy to see if they're doing the right ads on the logs. Because ideally, of course, what you do is you prioritise the ones that have grown big because they're the ones that are going to go boom very soon. But you can certainly see what they're doing. Or are they just going to the boss and just trying to do what cleave they can? I mean, sometimes you get a bit of that as well. You do have to consider extenuating circumstances. You have to try and consider how the raid might be coordinated. But in a situation where ads blow up, you can certainly then, maybe again, this is where it's better to look at wipes than kills. If an ad blows up and that's what killed people, what did you do about that ad? Was there anything that if you just walked straight past it without doing any damage to it, sort of your fault. Not necessarily only your fault, but you're looking for things like that as well. So what we'd really rather is that people focus on the mechanics rather than the DPS, because we keep saying this as well to people. There are very few DPS checks. Like sometimes you think on a fight, well, there's that DPS check, that DPS check. But when you're progressing, until you fail a DPS check, there is no DPS check. There are only mechanics. So you learn the mechanics first. Then if you get to a particular point and you haven't quite got the DPS to make it, let's say Elisand, and you don't quite, on Elisand Mythic that we're doing at the moment, and you don't get her through to phase 2 before the 2-minute mark. Okay, at that point you haven't made a DPS check. So you need to focus more on the DPS. But until that happens, it's mechanics. It's 100% mechanics. because you cannot get through a Mythic boss progress fight without learning the mechanics. But you can do it without doing your best DPS. And it's as simple as that. So hopefully that was useful to you. That's, as I say, that's the process I go through when we're sort of looking for potential recruits. As I say, sometimes we do look at people who don't have that much experience, because of course everyone has to start somewhere. We all remember where we got our first break in raiding. For me, it was a very long time ago. So hope you found it interesting as always. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.